I was wondering if you guys can give a little introduction on yourselves, kind of go through everyone.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm Lauren, currently doing a master's in space physiology at King's. Yeah, I think that's I don't know, like what else is relevant in an introduction?
Yeah.
Nice. Shall I go?
Go for it.
Everyone feels like they're going to interrupt each other. So I'm Maia. I was at UCL, or University College London, until last year. Graduated in 2019, and I did my bachelor's in human sciences, which is it's like a multidisciplinary degree. So you do a bit of everything, really, like anything from like genetics. And then Eleanor and I met on the space medicine and extreme environment physiology module in our final year. And now I'm doing the Masters in Space Physiology at King's. And we just had our last exam yesterday, so I think we're all in quite a good mood.
Congrats!
So my name's Eleanor. I graduated in September from physics and medical physics degree at UCL, which was a bachelor's, and I've been working in a research lab, and I was meant to go to the US, but with the whole lockdown situation I couldn't, so I'm just preparing to start medical school in September now.
All right. Hi Caroline, sorry I had some mic issues at the beginning there.
No, I did too.
My name's Nina. I took a little bit of a winding road. I'm in my late 20s now, but I'm a graduate entry medical student, and I'm taking a year out with Maia and Lauren to do the space physiology MSc at King's. Before that I was a physicist, so I've been where you are. I did physics as undergrad, did an MPhys in astrophysics, and then a PhD in medical physics.
Oh, sweet. How did you all meet?
Nina and I knew each other because we spent a week together at the European Space Agency a couple of years ago doing their human space physiology training course. So Nina and I met there. Then the four of us came together. There was a kind of open day for students at the Centre for Aviation Medicine with the RAF. So the four of us were all there that day, and completely by chance, Eleanor needed a lift back to London, and so she and I ended up driving back to London together, and got chatting then. And then about a week later, I think Eleanor texted, "Yeah, let's put something together. Let's get a team going." So
I love that. How did you decide to stick together though and form your research team? Also, how did you pick the name? I love the name. Paraboladies. Paraboladies.
Yeah, I fully suggested the name as a joke, right? So we came together for the Student Aerospace Challenge. So we were looking into medical selection for suborbital space flights, right? And the flight profile that we were looking at was a parabola. So then I kind of went, parabola and ladies, let's stick it together. Fully not expecting it to go anywhere. And here we are, a year and a half later.
How did you guys realize you wanted to concentrate on space medicine? Kind of a broad question, but
kind of the passion that brought us all together, because we met at the RAF day, which was for aviation medicine, but Maia and I had our module together, and Lauren and Nina had been at the European Space Agency, so I think we kind of realized that was the determining factor between all of us. And then for the challenge, it was a space medicine question that we did our report on, so I think that's where it started.
Part of it, he says, what we want to do is show that there's a really diverse range of careers you can have in the space industry. So we want to show kids that, okay, you don't have to be an astronaut if you wanted to go into space. Because when I was younger, I was obsessed with all things space, but didn't want to be an astronaut because I was afraid of elevators. So I was like, I can't go into space. I can't go into the space industry. And then applying for uni, don't want to do engineering. It's not for me. So I was like, I can't go into space industry, but physics, it still works. So there's lawyers, doctors, business analysts, and of course engineers, just everything. So I think it's really nice that we're able to combine both degrees. And again, if we're going to go into more space tourism and living there fully, we have to have doctors. That's kind of how it works. Even now, of course, very needed.
I think that's what I realised, because we spoke to Bonnie, who's a doctor in the RAF, and she was talking about the International Space University Masters. Was it a Masters that she did? Yeah, and she said that she met a space architect, and that just blew my mind.
That's
one
so
of the
cool.
things that we have found a lot during kind of the exposure to space medicine that we've had as well is the fact that it is so multidisciplinary. Like, we focus on the health side of things, but also there's like the ergonomics of design and having the people who go to space being at the center of that design. So things like the design of the ISS is done by like engineers and, like you said, like space architects and everything like that, but you have to keep the person at the center of that. So there has to be a lot of collaboration between different fields, and I think that's something that we've found that we've really like benefited from, knowing people in these different areas.
Yeah, I think when you said space medicine, like the medical industry, it is people from all kind of areas of medicine, everything from research, medical engineers, physiotherapists. It's not just doctors who do space medicine. In fact, they're probably one of the smallest cohorts in it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. I was thinking, if you go through your doctors that you've ever been to in your life, they're not all GPs, so you can't just say, oh, I'm a space doctor at one point. And what do you guys think? At what point in space tourism or space travel will you have a space, I don't know, arthritis doctor, a space anything? Like, at what point do you think we're going to differentiate enough where there'll be a variety and diversity of space doctor roles, specialties, not just I'm a space doctor?
Well, Nina's sort of been doing that bit on space surgery, haven't you? And obviously, Eleanor, you know about that as well.
Yeah, me and Eleanor love space surgery, and it's a new thing now.
Basically, if I had any advice for people who were looking to get into the space world, but were doing a degree that they think wasn't related at all, you kind of have to take it as a project on your own. So for my dissertation, I just went to my department and was like, because my degree is in medical physics, I was just like, can I design an enclosure for surgery in space? And they didn't really understand what it was, but they let me, thank God. So I think that they really helped me to contact people in the industry who had a lot more knowledge than me, and even just researching it, I got more confidence talking about space medicine. So I think that's what I would advise people to do, is just to take on projects and don't think that you're not qualified enough to do it just because you're an undergrad or something like that. I think if you have the passion and you have the time, then you can definitely come out with some really interesting stuff. But to answer your question, I think the best thing would probably be to differentiate from now on. I mean, why not? There are people who are doing like space gynecology, like Varsha Jain, and people who are doing very specific research, because space medicine is very small like area. So the people that are going into it are already doctors or already engineers and that kind of thing. They already have their own specialty, so they're just bringing that to the space industry.
And women's health and things like that is becoming way more of a focus in the space health world now, which is obviously a good thing.
A lot of people will come to it already having personal like special interests, and certainly like you can tailor what you do in terms of research or the exposure that you get. You can tailor those things to your specific interest. So while a lot of people within space medicine are generalists, you do also get people who have specific interests as well.
This is kind of a practical question, but how do you go down into the space medicine route? I feel like it's not as defined as, say, like a heart surgeon. It's not. If you ask like a careers teacher at school, how do I become a space doctor? It's not
genuinely like
that's
the thing. There's no kind of set path. If you talk to anyone who works in space medicine, they're kind of like, oh, well, I did emergency for a while, and then I met this person at a random conference or whatever. So I think that is one of the things. There's no kind of set right way to do it. There is a training pathway in the UK, aviation and space medicine, and there are a few people within that, but it is a very small specialty. So that is one way to do it in the UK, and you do that like after medical school and after the start of like general training. But yeah, I think it is just a case of you can move in lots of different directions. You can do a bit of research and whatever. You kind of zigzag your way into it as long as you're always moving forward.
I think the whole industry is very welcoming as well. So if you just reach out to people and express your interest and your passion for it, people are more than happy to help you out, and you can really create your own opportunities rather than sort of relying on a strict pathway to go down, which is quite nice. I know that's what we found anyway.
Do you think it'd be productive to actually separate space medicine school and medicine and just medicine, like a normal med school? Obviously, it'd be years away, but do you think it'd be more productive? So you would learn, okay, the effects of, I don't know, the blood flow. You would learn the effects of blood flow in gravity. not just on Earth. And because at one point people will be born in space, so you won't have to learn the Earth conditions. You'll learn
our master's course is our first semester was like we learned the physiology of the heart, the lungs, the muscles, everything on Earth. So they gave us that really strong basis of the understanding of physiology, so that then we could use that knowledge and apply it to the space environment. So I think it is important to have that real understanding of normal physiology first.
There's also a real focus on getting space applications back onto Earth as well. So using it as a model for aging and things like that. There's actually a lot of overlaps, and you can learn a lot from space and apply that to your medical degree or whatever. It's really helpful.
That makes sense.
In America, they have dedicated aerospace medicine medical schools. And it's not just space medicine, it's aviation, diving, and like Lauren said, encompassing everything about, because astronauts are people and space tourists are people who've got the health problems on Earth as well. So you do learn all the medicine and then take it kind of those steps further. But they have obviously bigger space agency and the military and civil aviation to go into as well.
Oh, fair enough. Are there any similarities between the remote doctor's appointments that are going on today during lockdown and how medical advice is given to astronauts in space from the grounded doctors?
Yeah, telemedicine is a big thing at the moment. I was talking to a GP friend and she said that her whole practice has changed, and she's now doing everything remotely and basically not having that traditional thing of a patient in front of you that you examine and just relying on what they say about their symptoms. I definitely think there's a big mirror to what happens in space medicine on the ISS for sure.
I think also as we look to, I mean, NASA are talking about like the moon and moving on to Mars and everything, and when we like look at living there long term, there's going to be a lot of medical support that comes from the ground as well. So then you have that increased reliance on telemedicine. And like Maia said, like in terms of applying that sort of thing back to Earth, that means that we can improve access to medical care in some of the most remote regions of the planet. You know, if people live kind of high up a mountain or they don't have access to specialist medical care, then we can use the lessons that we learn in space medicine and kind of apply those back to life on Earth. So,
and it's not just this is it. It's everything going on, like isolation and the way that people are living right now. The kind of problems that they do need help with are not usually the problems that you would see in society at the moment. But astronauts do deal with that through their training and then going into space. It's some very weird similarities coming out with space medicine and coronavirus for sure.
Definitely, because I always wonder, like, how would you have the room on the ISS? And is there room to have like X-ray machines, ultrasounds, just MRI? You can't have an MRI. I don't know how you would do that. I guess, yeah. How do you fit the big machines in, or do you have to compromise and not have those machines in testing? Or
they compromise, don't they?
Yeah,
they just
that's
have
the
the
only thing they
ultrasound,
can use right now.
Yeah.
MRIs and the magnets would start interfering with the like attitude control magnetometers and stuff, and then X-ray and all that. You don't want to expose astronauts to X-ray radiation because they've already being exposed to higher levels than they would on Earth. So they kind of just have adapted, and they've led a lot of developments in ultrasound technology as well that have now been used on Earth, because that's for now the only tool that they can really use.
Space medicine's big on preventative medicine. You don't want to send someone up and then think, oh, I need to give them an MRI. It's like you want to screen and protect before you send someone up there. I guess that's why we were so interested in medical screening for space tourists, because they will have possibly medical problems, and it was just so interesting to look at the differences between astronauts and space tourists.
definitely. When I think of space medicine, I don't know much about it before I was researching for this, but I only thought about the commonly known fact that when astronauts are living in the ISS for a long time, they have to exercise for hours a day so their muscles don't deteriorate, and the mental health aspects of going into space. But is there anything else that people don't realize if they are not specialized in this field?
I don't know. Has anyone got a favorite space medicine to talk about?
Yeah,
I think it's the new stuff. Is the new stuff that we're still discovering now, because we're starting to send people up for longer. Like, you would assume that we know a lot because there have been people on the ISS for 19 years, like rotating obviously, and then there have been people going up in space shuttles and stuff, but we're still discovering different effects that it has on the body. So like they get some visual changes, and those aren't completely understood as to the mechanism and what means that it's changing the shape of the eye, or they're getting different like symptoms that they can't really explain with earth medicine, if that's how you want to look at it. So I think that's the most interesting for me, is that there is probably a lot more that we don't even understand or know yet, because we haven't sent people up for more than a year.
Radiation as well is a major one they're looking into now, because if we're going to be going on longer duration missions to the moon and the Mars, and you don't have that protective field around the Earth, it can be quite dangerous. So they need to look more into that, because no one's been in space long enough to know if the dose is going to accumulate or what's really going to happen.
I think the thing that I've found the most interesting is in regards to women's health, because I mean, in terms of what I've learned in medical school, that's been one of the things that I found the most interesting. But also the fact that, you know, female astronauts don't have periods in space. Most of them choose to take the oral contraceptive pill the entire time they're there. So we haven't yet worked out a mechanism for women to be able to have periods safely and hygienically in space, and that's a massive issue. Like you said, one day there's going to be babies who are born on Mars, on the moon, and we don't know how they're going to develop. So it's a massive area of research. So
oh yeah, that's true. What do you think is the most dangerous effect of living in space in the human body? Like the single most dangerous? Not to be scary, but
probably
the
going to
worst
be the
side
radiation
effects.
point, right?
Yeah, in terms of mortality.
Yeah.
If you're looking at it like,
It might even just being far away is probably the biggest risk, I think, because you can't, the communication lag, you can't even on the ISS you can get someone back in 4 hours if they take ill, but if you're sending someone to Mars, they've really got to be able to deal with a medical emergency themselves, otherwise, you know.
I read that astronauts have to get their appendixes taken out before going up, which makes sense, but there's so many more of the emergency surgeries that one could have that are fatal. I was thinking about that. Like, it's not the only one that you could have.
The one that I have learnt about that I never thought of is dental emergencies.
Oh yeah.
So like problems with teeth, if you get like an abscess or whatever, then that can be a really serious problem. People can get like sepsis, and it can be really serious. But you don't think about astronauts having problems with their teeth. That's
they are trained, I think, on like basic dental procedures as well as like sutures and stuff. But it's really interesting to think that in the future, if we do send space tourists up for like a long amount of time, are we going to also train them on basic procedures, or are we going to rely on having one or two doctors if the others taken ill and that kind of
That's
thing?
actually crazy. I literally, because there's like little things can happen that can just blow up. But I don't know. I remember cutting my leg on my last day of school, and that turned into an infection, and I got like really ill, and I almost couldn't take my A-levels. So like there's stuff like that you just need to like think about, that it's not even a pre-existing condition or anything that just comes about because you cut yourself on a pavement. You know, it's just a little random anecdote, but something like that.
And your body's already at a disadvantage as well. So whatever happens, if we haven't experienced it or researched it in space before, then we don't really know how the body's going to react, because you're already at like in terms of blood, these guys can explain it better, but your body's reaction to space to adapt, then you lose blood volume, and if you start bleeding out, then you've got less blood to bleed out essentially, and then could very quickly lead to bigger issues than you would predict them being on Earth.
Oh my gosh. I'm actually fascinated by blood clots. One, because I do have like a blood clotting disorder, but I'll take that out of the pod. But what do you get? Is there increased risk of blood clots in space? And I guess with the oral contraceptive, as well, that increases, I might be wrong, but doesn't that increase the chances of blood clots as well? So how would that, wouldn't that be a risk,
and
more dangerous for female astronauts?
There was a report published recently that they found a massive blood clot in an astronaut's neck, so one of the veins in their neck, and they were able to like treat it while they were still in space and everything, and it was all okay, but it was found incidentally. So one of the things is, if they hadn't have found it when they did, then it could potentially have had quite serious consequences. because normally if you get a blood clot on Earth, generally they tend to happen in the lower body because of like the effects of gravity and everything. But then when you're in space, that then is not there as a protective mechanism. So yeah, but like you said, with the oral contraceptive as well.
How did they find that?
It was a part of an ultrasound study. They were looking at jugular venous flow, and they found a massive blood clot. So imagine finding that incidentally, though. Like, how panicked
Yeah,
they
and you're just like analysing images for your research, and then you have to call up NASA and be like, guys,
I need help.
We have a problem.
Was that a situation where he or she was flown back to Earth then?
No, they managed to give like the right medication and everything still on station, so they didn't need to be evacuated.
In general, they really try and like reduce the chance that they have to come back to Earth or they'd have to evacuate, because it just costs so much time and money, and like operationally it doesn't really work. It's all got to be done up there if possible, unless it's an absolute emergency.
They did give the medication for the blood clot, but they found it didn't break the blood clot down. She still had it, I think, when she came down. And that's like brings into pharmacology in space, like the drugs work the same. She also had to take a half dose towards the end because she didn't have enough of the medication. So yeah, pharmacology is a massive thing. If you're going on a 3-year mission, if somebody does need, astrosurgery, are you going to be able to give them the medication they need afterwards, antibiotics, things like that?
Oh, that's crazy. What would the effects of longer days on Mars have on humans?
That's an interesting one. I don't know. Does anyone know more than?
For our masters, I did a sleep project and looked into the effects of sleep in space. So I looked a little bit at Mars and then a little bit on the ISS. And as much as I understand, the Mars day is longer, but only by like a couple of minutes. So relatively, it shouldn't actually make that much difference, and it will actually be easier to sleep on Mars than it would on the ISS, because on the ISS they get sunrise and sunset every 90 minutes, and they've got to basically adapt to that. And I know that there's a lot of sleep troubles up there, but on Mars I think it's only like half an hour longer or something like that, so it shouldn't be too difficult.
And a bit of gravity might make it easier to sleep, because somebody else on our course said that without gravity it's possible that you don't, when you're in weightlessness on the ISS, you don't go into, is it REM? You don't get REM sleep, or you do. It's one or the other. You don't get the same quality of sleep when you don't have the same amount of gravity as Earth. So maybe they'll sleep better on Mars, but they won't sleep very well on the way there.
How do astronauts maintain a healthy, good diet and hygiene in space? Like, how do they get enough vitamins and minerals?
Space nutrition is like a big thing. They have like regularly recycling menus, so they will go through a particular like menu over a couple of days and then it starts over. But there is a lot of stuff going into like the nutritional content of food. So in space, they won't eat exactly the same things. Also, their taste is affected, so they won't want to eat the same foods. There's a kind of story of astronauts all wanting like Tabasco and like hot sauce on stuff, because the way that they experience taste is different. And so what they do is they go for really hot things, because that sensation of heat in their mouth, it is like replacing the taste of those foods. But like they need to make sure that they stay like adequately hydrated, they have the right balance of electrolytes and things like that. So
wow, a lot of preparation. I read somewhere that the diet and nutrition and just overall exercise and health, monitoring all that, is more intense and specified and regulated than that of Olympic athletes. It's a lot.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Yeah, all their days are like planned to the minute.
yeah.
And that includes the research that they do, but also the food, the exercise, and everything. And they have so many experts working on Earth to support them. That's why I think they're all very keen to make sure that everyone recognizes how much work actually goes into keeping them healthy and happy up there, because it's not just them, it's a huge team down on Earth.
We went into the mission control room at the European Astronaut Centre in Germany, and you could sort of see the schedules of the astronauts, and like Eleanor said, it's genuinely planned to the minute. And I looked at it really closely because I'd never seen something like that before, and I was like, is there sort of time to relax or like read a book or something, I don't know. And they said, oh well, you know, they get 45 minutes before bed, but then that's sort of taken up with like getting ready for bed and sleeping and things like that. And but other than that, they're working or exercising or eating most of the day.
Wow, that's crazy. Can you explain, or someone explain, the medical preparations before, during, and after an ISS trip?
We just had an exam question on that, didn't we?
Oh, really? That's perfect. Sorry, we'll bring you back to that.
Oh, best do it as a team so we can catch on any wrong exam. But basically, it starts with the medical screening that you go through when you apply to be an astronaut candidate. And then if you're deemed highly qualified, you go through more tests, and you might come from the military and have already had that kind of class medical for military aviation, or you could be like a scientific astronaut candidate and come in and get all your screening done at NASA. And then they've got their international partners. All the flight surgeons are kind of certified through at the JSC by NASA, but you can be from a different space agency or a different company affiliated with the space agency. And then you get even more testing at various points before your trip to the ISS if you're kind of put forward to go up there as crew. And even up to 2 days before, you're still having tests. You're put in quarantine to make sure that you don't take something nasty up there. And then that kind of serves as a baseline for countermeasures as well. So when you come back, you get very similar tests, physiotherapy, to bring your muscle health back to the baseline before. Not everybody that goes up is the same level of fitness. So as long as you meet your baseline, that's fine. There's no kind of black and white level that your fitness has to be that way.
And like you mentioned, the muscle and bone wastes away in space, and there's an exercise regime that astronauts follow in terms of reaching their peak fitness. So they would start off, obviously most of them are like fit people anyway, but they would exercise to reach their sort of peak fitness just before they launch. And then as the first few days in space, as you're sort of adapting to that fitness will drop. And then you build that up again on the station through specified exercises so that you're again at the peak fitness that you can be before you come back to Earth, because you're going to struggle a lot when you get to Earth, and the force of gravity is just something, it feels like something completely new. And I also know that when you're up there, you have sort of weekly meetings with a space psychologist or an exercise specialist, and then a doctor, just to sort of check in. You've got all sorts of specialities, just like trying to maintain your health when you're up there.
And also, Maia, you're an RAF reservist, right? That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you've experienced the psychological effects of flying and the gravity force firsthand. How has that kind of influenced and changed the way you see your medical work?
So something that I think the girls know, I really wanted to do my summer research project on the centrifuge, the RAF centrifuge. And in terms of like experiences that I've had, obviously never microgravity, sadly, but you'll sort of go up and you follow the RAF elementary flying training curriculum, just sort of when you can alongside uni, and you'll do things like aerobatics or like steep turns and things like that. You feel it's so strange the first time you do it. I can't describe it. And the weirdest feeling is when you pull negative G, so you're sort of pitching down and the blood rushes up into your head, and it's something that you never feel like, not on an airline or anything. And that's definitely the most uncomfortable, but that sort of pushed me in sort of that direction. I love looking into that sort of thing because I think it's so interesting. But yeah,
that's so cool. Oh, I want to feel that. It's cool.
Are you allowed to tell your story about being grounded on medical grounds?
Oh my god, yeah. This happened. This was the last flight that I had before coronavirus hit, and so we can't fly or anything now. But then in sort of like, I think it was early February, I went up and I was flying with one of the instructors, and then within 5 minutes we were just sort of chatting, and I think we were like heading north, and then he was like, can you smell that? And I was like, yeah, I can. And it was like this really strong smell of fuel. And then he was like, oh, for goodness sake. And you just sort of realize how well trained they are, because, you know, instead of panicking, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the first time something's actually gone wrong. He was just sort of like, oh, this is a nuisance. And we had to crack open the canopy, fly back and land back on the runway. And then immediately we got picked up by the station medical team, who was sort of checking our heart rate, checking our oxygen saturation. We were both completely fine, but then we had to have a meeting with the GP, and it was so sort of serious, and they were like, yeah, you've got to be grounded for 24 hours, and I haven't been able to fly since then, but that's just because of coronavirus. But yeah, that was quite
That's
funny.
scary.
I don't think I'm allowed to say that.
I'd be scared. That's funny.
Yeah, but he was so calm, so I was calm. I was like, okay, you just
Yeah.
take over, I don't have to do anything.
I remember, so I'm obsessed with Apollo 13. Everyone who knows me knows that. Actually, funny story, a little anecdote. When I first met Sophia at the NASA competition we were at, Sophia is the co-chair of, the vice chair, I can't edit that again. Oh, sorry, more things, the bloopers reel. But she's like vice chair at ESADS. And when I first met her, we were in this group project, and all our phones are being like passed around to make hotspots, and I made her hotspot password Apollo 13, and still that's since. So everyone ESADS uses her phone hotspot and knows Apollo 13. I'm obsessed with the story, obsessed. And I did an EPQ on it, you know, it's the whole thing. And I just know that the basis of my medical space history was that Ken Mattingly was grounded on Apollo 13 because he had some sort of, it wasn't antibody, because that's a good thing, but some sort of immune response to the measles, and they didn't want him to go up on Apollo 13 with the measles because it was like projected.
But there's been like studies that have
like
shown that different infections behave differently in space as well. So there's increased virulence, so you can get a lot more sick than they would do.
That's all I know.
On
You
Earth.
have to really be like very healthy before you go up there. Or it was like, nope, even if there's a small chance or big chance that you are going to get sick.
And you've got several people in a very confined space, then they can't really go anywhere. A lot of the air's recycled. So, you know, all of these factors mount up to, if someone is sick on the ISS, then it could end up being really serious, which is why they have the period of quarantine before they send people up.
I mean, they've got that choice. Enough people want to be astronauts, so they can choose sort of the fittest of the fit, can't they?
And your immune system is probably weaker as well, so the combination of that doesn't end very well.
Well, they say that microgravity is a great environment until you have to come back down, right? So, like, a lot of the problems that you experience are only problems when you come back down.
Yeah, fair enough.
Good.
Are there any positive side effects of being in space, like for your body?
Yeah, you're right. Everyone talk about the negatives, don't they? There's the overview effect that can be really positive. So when you see the Earth from the ISS, you kind of, you know, your views and how you feel about life change, and you can come back and you can be give loads of money to charity, be helping everybody that you can. It just makes you appreciate life so much more. And yeah,
I think the one that I found the most interesting is when they go out on spacewalks outside the ISS. Generally, people on their first spacewalk, they've talked about like going out, stepping out
in
into
terms
space
of
for the
mental
first time,
health,
and suddenly looking down at the Earth and then just feeling like they're falling towards it.
And
so there's this sudden like paradigm shift
or
of,
that
you know,
of
you
balance,
look
or
down
what are
at
the
the
biggest
Earth and there's
mental
nothing between
health issues that astronauts are most
the
aware
Earth's
of and
surface and you.
preventative
You're
towards?
kind of looking out into this void, and they just suddenly feel like they're tumbling. So
Environmental activists and things like that, because you just think the Earth is such a wonderful thing, and you don't get that perspective when you're on it, if you know what I mean. You can sort of see it for what it really is.
Yeah, for mental health on the ISS, I think it's like a lot of high performance jobs are adopting more of a positive policy towards mental health, and things like phone calls with families back home when you're in space, like they make time for you to have those things that have a positive impact, and don't they have like meals with all the other crew members, and kind of I'm sure I read about DoubleTree cookies, they were baking those, and like just little things that really do. I guess we're all doing it now, aren't we, with coronavirus? Baking a banana bread is like the best thing ever at the moment.
I think I read part of Buzz Aldrin's autobiography, and something that he really struggled with when he came back from the Apollo mission was, I think, the fact that he was the second man on the moon, not the first. And I think traditionally the sort of lowest crew member in terms of rank is supposed to be the first person, or was supposed to be the first person to set foot on the moon. But because it was such a monumental mission, Neil was the one that ended up being the first person. And he said that when he came back, like the media attention was just unbelievable. And, you know, back then you don't have the preparation that you do now. And I think that was something that he really, really struggled with when he came back. And I think that's something that's changing, is like social media is becoming bigger and bigger, preparing the astronauts for the huge PR role that they are going to have. Like Tim Peake has done so much for the UK in terms of PR and like outreach for younger children and things like that. And that's something that I think is a relatively new aspect to the role.
Yeah, I think they've started to realise, even just in selection, that it does completely depend on the person, obviously, how they're going to react. But some people deal with it better than others. And some people, for example, for some people, like the interaction with the crew is really important, and how the crew's getting on, and whether the crew gets on, because there have been crews that haven't, and or whether it's talking to their families. But even just going past the ISS, and when we're thinking about missions to like Mars, they're thinking that not being able to see the Earth, or rather seeing the Earth as like a speck in the sky, is going to be an incredible sort of mental shift that we can't really prepare ourselves for in any way. Because even the analog missions where people are sort of locked away in hangars for 6 months, they still know that they're on Earth, and you don't really have to adapt your perception of where you are as much as if you just turn around and look at the sky and you think, well, the Earth is out there somewhere and that's home.
And I think it's sort of the start of space exploration in the 60s. The classic sort of demographic for an astronaut was a fast jet test pilot, which, you know, I don't want to sort of pin labels, but it comes with a sort of alpha male persona a lot of the time. And you hear all these stories about people that were up there literally having fistfights in space, and now it's completely different. And they've done all these studies at the Concordia station in Antarctica about what sort of groups of people interact well and what sort of person makes the ideal astronaut, and people are far more psychologically screened for that sort of thing now.
And one of the things that it perpetuates is the kind of us versus them thing. So the ground crew will be talking to them and telling them things to do or anything like that. And, you know, there's the possibility of, if things start to go wrong, the crew goes, well, you're not here, you don't understand what it's like. So there's that kind of rift between the crew in space and the crew on the ground. And that's possibly made worse the further you get from Earth. But you know, that's one of the things that they are looking at, like psychologically speaking, to try and get this kind of sense of crew cohesion going forward.
I think it's quite hard to account for the human factors of spaceflight sometimes. When you're in a dangerous situation, you know, you can do as many simulations as you like, but until you're actually in that situation, you can't predict how a human is going to react to an emergency, really. And I think that's sort of, there's more awareness on that now, and people are accounting for that more, which is good. But if something were to go wrong, you have no idea how you're going to react in that situation, but you can only prepare as best you can.
I think that is also one of the positives that's come out of just the general ISS project, if you can call it that, just the international crews that they send up, and the fact that there's mission control in sort of 3 or 4 different countries, and they're all working together, completely ignoring any political situation that's going on. It's been working through that, and they still know that they need to work together to get the mission sort of a success, rather than actually bothering about sort of clashes or any political situations.
Definitely, especially with the language barriers as well. It must be really difficult. And obviously the data that we have from past astronauts is not very diverse, actually not diverse at all in terms of age, race, and gender. How is that limiting us in upcoming steps to the moon and Mars in terms of medicine?
Even now, it's kind of the male body is seen as the default. So that's why the point of like the women's health research is to kind of shift that view. So you'll look at space medicine research studies and it'll be like, we had 10 participants, 9 male, 1 female, and you're like, oh, okay. You know, so
There's been proposals for an all-female team to go to Mars and things like that, but people don't know how that's going to go because, like Lauren said, their body isn't seen as the default.
yeah. And even you know, people coming from different backgrounds, having different cultures, and we need to, if you put people in what is effectively a tin can for 6 months,
And I guess
you know,
as
you
well,
have to
that
understand
as the year goes
how
on, years go
people
on,
from
we have
different
more data
cultures will have
sets.
different
So
expectations of what life will
the
be like.
physiological and
So
the
those people need
psychological research
to
won't
be
be
able
as
to work
limited. Is that
together
correct? Like the
and
more
live
years go
together
on, the more data we
efficiently.
have,
So,
the more
you know, it is
solutions we have, and just,
definitely
cures everything.
the broader our
solutions.
research goes, the better we'll understand just the human condition.
Definitely.
There's so no, it's what's interesting is the storage of data and samples at NASA now, and if you're at an academic institution around the world, you can apply to access those samples and do research on them. So that's like a massive plus at the moment. And also they do the longitudinal astronaut study, so everybody gets followed up, you know, for the rest of their lives. So I think as the years go on and we get those bigger sample sizes and they're all backed up and accessible to the research community, instead of you don't have to just work at a space agency to do the science, we'll know more. But there definitely needs to be more diversity, like you say, ethnicity. I bet those sample sizes are so small.
I think the other thing to think about is that we keep changing the missions that we're doing. For a long time they were shuttle missions, and then they were 6-month ISS missions, and then they were 1-year missions, and I think those are going to keep changing because of the nature of what we want to do is explore and do something different every time. So we might get bigger sample sizes overall, but you're still going to have small sample sizes that we're just doing a 6-month or just doing a 1 year. So I think we'll probably struggle with that issue for a while, but there are ways that you can work with that and counter that and still get some great sort of scientific results, and sort of come up with countermeasures and stuff that do apply to everyone, even if it's only researched on a few. So that was with Lauren as well. No, I mean NASA posts about them, so I think we're allowed to. It was through a project. So if there are actually any young listeners that are thinking about getting into the space industry, there's a project called Mission Discovery that's led by a company called ICET, and they invite you for a week to King's, and it's I think it's up to A-level students, and you get students of all ages, and you can either stay in London or you can do it as like a residential and stay with them. And Lauren and I have been helping out with that a few years now, I think. And so you come and you have lectures from astronauts, which is really cool, and also lecturers from King's that have lectured these guys on their masters, so people that are pretty high up there. And you essentially design an experiment that you want to send to space and then compete at the end by presenting it to everyone, which is another challenge in itself, obviously, at that age. But it's really, really interesting. And those experiments then get voted on, and the winning ones get developed in the lab and sent to space. And Lauren and I were lucky enough this year to be invited to help out in developing them. And then they launched in March, and they're doing good.
And speaking of data and research, congratulations on having 2 experiments sent to the ISS. Can you talk about those and explain them? Are they secret, or are they like they're top secrets? Okay.
So it was so cool. So like a team of us got to go out to Kennedy Space Center in Florida and work in the labs there, which I'm not gonna lie, for someone who's been enthusiastic about space for like most of my life, it was my childhood dream to work at NASA, and therefore having that week where we developed the experiments in the labs at Kennedy and got to launch them was honestly one of the best experiences of my life. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. Speaking of education and outreach, how would you encourage other people to get into this field and make it, how accessible do you think the subject is becoming?
I mean, I think one of our things is we're trying to make sure that it's as accessible as possible. We're all really, really passionate about outreach and kind of getting people involved. But I think one of the biggest things that people should know is that anyone who is in this field is in it because they love it. So if you approach someone and go, I find this stuff really cool, but I don't know anything about it, can you talk to me? Everyone will be more than happy to do that. So if you should never be held back by feeling like you're an enthusiastic amateur, because that's at the end of the day how everyone starts. So, you know, any of us, if someone was to come up to us and go, we think space is really cool, but we don't know anything about it, then we'd talk to them. I will talk people's ears off about this. Like, you know, we're all so happy to share what we know and you know, help other people get involved, because we want other people to love it as much as we do.
Soccer, but I was watching your at Kings, and you could like tell how passionate you were, and everyone is. You hear about space medicine, and it's everyone who's into space just loves space so much. That's amazing. And that's why I feel like it's really rewarding to do outreach in space. And I'm sure outreach for every subject is really rewarding and fantastic, and it's amazing. But something about space is fantastic, and you'll all have been somehow involved in outreach for STEM, whether that's ambassadors or actually been teachers. Why do you enjoy doing it, and what is the best piece of advice that you can give to students or have received yourself about starting your careers?
My advice would be definitely find a mentor, find somebody that you can go to for advice. Everybody's so welcoming in this community. My main mentor is my PhD supervisor, who I met on undergrad. And I can get a reference off him. I can tell him about, you know, what's going on in my life at the moment. He's always got wise words and a friendly ear, and I think that makes a big difference. So when you're at university or school, reach out and just, you know, try and foster that relationship. It definitely gives you confidence to keep going.
I think if I was to give advice to add to that, obviously, I think reaching out is a great way to start, but also just doing research on the subject and reading around it and starting to build your knowledge a little bit more, and listening to podcasts like this, or even like going to conferences. And now, obviously, with the coronavirus, there's a lot of stuff online that you can just listen to passively and start digging into it a bit more and find if it really is your passion. And you'll soon find that if it is, then that is what you'll be thinking about most of the day. But even if it's not, like, just get into it and get stuck in and ask for help. And there are a few things like joining UK SEDS. If you're passionate about space medicine in particular, there's the Space Generation Advisory Council, which has a space medicine life sciences group, which you can join. And that's just a huge community of international people under the age of 35, I think, who just post if they have a project they want you to get involved in, or you can just chat and introduce yourself and see if other people have a lot more specific interests in space medicine as well, because people have their angles that they're coming from. You can find collaborators for projects, and that's definitely a huge asset, I think.
Yeah, there's no cap on the number of people that can get involved in it. If you love it, then you'll do well. You know, there's no such thing as stupid questions. There's like no time like the present. And I know that just the space sector in general is something that we're almost entering a new dawn of it now, with missions to the moon and Mars, and there's no greater time to get involved than now. It's always something that's going to be progressing. There's always going to be people looking into this, because humans are just naturally curious beings. You know, we can't stop thinking about that. So don't be put off by something.
We should probably mention the Next Generation Aerospace Medicine subgroup as well from the Royal. Yeah, go.
That's what I was going to bring up. So yeah, if you get involved, the Royal Aeronautical Society have an aerospace medicine group. So that's not just space medicine, that involves aviation as well. And we are in the process of setting up a next generation aerospace medicine group, which is going to be specifically for people who are early in their careers and just somewhere where we can kind of collate information for people who want to know more. So yeah, you can follow us on Twitter. I believe it's NextGenASM. I'll double check that though. And yeah, but also yeah, reaching out to people on social media is a big thing. I'm not sure about the rest of them, but I do half of my networking over Twitter, so it's it's a great way to find out more and get involved. So
Definitely. What skills and qualities would you say you need to work in space medicine?
I mean, the top one is just love for it, isn't it? You talk to anyone who does anything in space and you find that they just absolutely love it. But I think specifically in space medicine, a lot of the stuff will be done in your spare time. Specifically if you're in like medical studies or like pursuing a degree in a different subject, like a lot of it will be in your spare time. So it does require quite a bit of dedication. But I think everyone of us will agree that it is completely worth it. You will meet friends that you will have for the rest of your life, and you get to do what you love all of the time. So yeah, it is. You need to be dedicated, but it is definitely worth it.
I think you've just got to be naturally curious as well. The nature of the work is that you've got, again, such small sample sizes, you've got such ambiguity to work with, and you need to be prepared to sort of fill in the gaps and make allowances and really think things through. Because there's, there's so much ambiguity, you're never going to know if something's 100% right anyway. That's why I think it translates quite well to science.
A good skill to have would be to kind of be very open-minded and forward-thinking. You don't know who you're going to work with, what field is going to mix with a different field and come up with a solution for a problem. I remember when I was a postdoc in America, I shared an office with a guy who was working on characterizing the texture of tumors in breasts, and he was using software that NASA adopted to look at the surface of planets. So you just wouldn't put breast cancer and planetary science together, but it happens. So yeah, definitely forward thinking and open-minded.
What do you all want to do in the future? What would be your ideal future in the spectrum of space medicine?
Yeah, I think that you could bring any number of skills to the speciality, and that's what makes it so special and so great, is that people come to it from engineering to medicine to completely unrelated fields and then add their own insights. So I wouldn't say that you would have to be good at medicine or maths or anything. I think whatever you can bring to the table, just be confident and reach out.
Well, I think I would love to be like a professor and just giving all of these lectures about this branch of medicine that people aren't really that familiar with, and tying it back to how it helps people on Earth, doing research and also being a clinician. Those three things, tying it all together, doing space medicine, whether that's for passion academics or it's my actual job as a flight surgeon, I think I'll always do it. We'll see. I think I'll be a surgeon in the NHS if things work out.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I'm not really sure what the future holds for me. Obviously, I'm not doing graduate medicine. I don't have a medical background, but I feel like, I love learning, but I don't necessarily love academia. I'm not sure if going down a PhD path is the right one for me, but maybe something in research. I feel like I learn best on the job, like just getting stuck in and working on it like that. So I'm not sure. The options are open. I
got
think
2 years left on my medical degree and then graduating as a doctor. I've got a life plan that involves a PhD, and then my end goal would be to work as a flight surgeon. So fingers crossed that that ends up working out.
Yeah, well, I'm only just starting out in the medicine part of my career, so I think space medicine for a while at least will probably be an interest on the side, or like research. But I think what's most exciting for us getting into it now is that we don't know what the future holds, even for the space industry, because there's all this sort of commercial spaceflight and space tourism stuff happening, hopefully, and the first of which, the really exciting launch on the 27th. So yeah, I don't really know exactly what it holds for me. I definitely want space to be in there somewhere, but there are also jobs that will exist in 10 years that never existed before. So you could be a doctor for space tourists, or just doing research for like Virgin Galactic and that kind of stuff. So I think that's why it's so exciting at the moment to get into it, is that the whole space industry is shifting and we can be a part of that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, instead of patients, you have like astronauts or flight crew or whatever. So that's one big difference. But yeah, I guess it's just fundamentally it is the same. I guess caring for people's well-being. But it most closely aligns with occupational medicine on the ground. Kind of ensuring people are able to kind of perform and do their jobs properly. While also kind of caring for them and making sure that they're okay. So yeah, there are a flight surgeon will have like routine video calls with an astronaut and kind of checking in with them, seeing how they're feeling, making sure, like we said, that they're eating and exercising okay, and doing all of those things. It's kind of like being their port of call if anything is to go wrong. But also you're there for the pre-flight training, and you're part of the selection process. You're with them like remotely while they're on station, and then you're part of their rehabilitation process when they come back. So you're kind of forming a really close one-to-one relationship with those people, and I think that's part of the real draw for a lot of people, is that you are able to form that kind of personal connection with them.
There also is a lot of paperwork.
I was trying not to focus on the paperwork, you know.
It's just as it sounds.
I think flight surgeons they're also like assigned to an astronaut, but they look after their families as well. So you'll be supporting the family while they're up on the ISS, because that can obviously be a really tough time, but also just generally checking up on the family and medically looking after them, if you want to think of it like that. But they're also a big part of the research, as some of them are an integral part of research projects, or coordinating projects, or sort of making sure that the astronauts can adhere to the project and helping them decide as well, because astronauts do, at the end of the day, they can choose whether they want to do a particularly like invasive measurement of themselves, because they're not like lab rats, but all the experiments that most people want to do is on an astronaut, because that's where you get the really interesting data. So they are a big part of sort of helping them decide what they can and can't do.
Can you tell us more about the pre-flight medical checks in the commercial suborbital spaceflight participation paper that you wrote for the European Space Student Aerospace Challenge in 2018? Sorry, that's a long one.
You can do it. You're giving the talk at asthma.
I don't know, it's hard to know where to start because we did such a long report, didn't we? I think the biggest sort of conclusion that we drew from that was the idea of what was the word? Just like, it was knowing consent. Informed consent. So you need to be aware of the risks that are going to be posed to you by doing that. And I think that you know, if you pay enough money, you're going to space no matter what. And if that's your dream and someone turns around and tells you you can't go because of this, or you say you can go, you should know there's a really large risk of, you know, XYZ. If you want to take that risk, you can do it. But so ours would we just sort of outlined guidelines. We looked at several medical conditions to see what would be basically excluded if it was our choice, or ones that we just sort of advise against. But there are certain mechanisms that can be, or mitigation mechanisms that can be put in place to make sure that that flight was safe. I think the current sort of flight profile for Virgin Galactic and those sorts of companies isn't too strenuous, and it's still only a couple of hours. I think anxiety was actually one of the biggest drawbacks for that, because you want the participant to be able to enjoy the flight, and if they're, you know, quite stressed about it, you don't want to feel like they've wasted their money or whatever. So there's certain tactics that could be used now to fully prepare people to go up to space, whether that's on a centrifuge or flight simulations or whatever. So yeah, that's my 2 pence on it, really.
Yeah, I mean, people like Professor Stephen Hawking went up on a parabolic flight, and there are people with COPD who've been to the ISS. So it's not unheard of for space tourists to have medical conditions, and it is really just they're just guidelines at the moment, and there's nobody who says these are the rules and this is black and white whether you can go or not. It's about the doctor advocating for the patient and the participant making their own choice whether they want to take the risk or not.
Yeah, I think at the moment the flights that they're looking at are a couple of hours long, so they won't have the effects on the muscle and bone that they've seen in astronauts. It'll be a very different environment, but you will have a sort of shift of fluid when you get to microgravity from your legs sort of upwards, and you can get a sort of head fullness, like a head cold type of feeling. Some people could suffer from claustrophobia because of the cabin environment they're not used to, but also just being in microgravity is not a normal sensation, so that can either induce joy or panic in different people. And seeing the curvature of the Earth as well can be an incredible effect on some, but psychologically could affect others. So I think those are the main conditions in terms of what would happen to a sort of healthy body in space. And then on top of that, we had to then investigate all the different conditions and how it would affect that. And sort of like kidney stones could be loosened by the vibrations, and all the different considerations that you don't really think go into it, but actually there are a lot of things that you probably would want to be careful with.
Physically, a suborbital flight can almost be compared more closely to a roller coaster than spending sort of, 6 months on the ISS. And as Eleanor said, the kidney stone thing, you've got all these stories of people passing kidney stones on roller coasters and things like that, just because of the G-forces that you're going to be feeling when you're coming in and out of the atmosphere. I think that's the thing that people are the most unprepared for, because you're not exposed to that.
What do each of you think
really
is the most exciting things going on or in the future that you're most excited to see for in space medicine?
I think to be honest, the opening accessibility of it all with commercial space flight, which has been coming for quite some time now, I think that means that this is going to open up the field of space medicine to so many more people, because a lot more people are going to come into contact with it, which I think is going to mean that we have more interest in the field, more research going on. It is going to completely change the way that we look at space medicine as a whole, and I for one am really excited for it. So
yeah, I kind of share that with Lauren. I think something that I've found really interesting following the last few years is Elon Musk's journey, because he really changed the way that people think about space and space travel and the accessibility of space to the common person, people who aren't necessarily sort of experts. And the progress that he has made in such a short period of time is honestly incredible. And I think you need more sort of forward thinking like that in the future, because anything's possible, really.
I'm really excited for like genetic testing and personalized medicine, and how we can predict how people are going to fare on a 3-year mission to Mars, and also how that kind of spins back onto Earth for people like cancer patients, BRCA2 gene, for example, in that preventative medicine role. It all it ties in Earth medicine, space medicine, and then pushing the boundaries and going further, because you don't want to send someone up there that is going to be at risk of, say, a cancer that might be induced by high levels of radiation. And we're making massive progress in that kind of field. I'd be interested to see where that goes in space medicine.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. But I think for me, the most exciting is to see where space medicine can get Earth medicine in a sense, because it means that a lot more people will understand space medicine, but also appreciate it for what it does send back down to earth and the developments that it does encourage us to make here and change here, because medicine is very traditional on earth, and it doesn't often like move as fast as like certain researchers and like scientists would want it to, just because that's the way it's always been. But I think with space medicine and things being tested in such an extreme environment and then being sent down to earth, it'll make huge leaps and encourage a lot of innovation, especially because it brings in so many different fields from engineering and everything that can then be brought into earth medicine that isn't necessarily always allowed in that sense.
Amazing. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about in space medicine before we sign off, or your own research, or anything you want to kind of plug? I don't know.
I think the one thing for us to say is like we are happy to talk about this to anyone who wants to get in touch with us. Like, we will happily answer people's questions and point people in the right direction in terms of like resources, things to read, whatever. So if anyone has found any of this stuff like really interesting, then get in touch with us. We have Twitter, Instagram, we have an email address. Like, get in touch, and
I'll link it all
happy to
in the description box.
more.
How it all is. But thank you guys so much for coming on the show, like a show podcast. I don't even know what it is, but thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Oh no, of course.
Thank you for having us.